Hi, welcome to the weekly version of the Business of Tech podcast. All the stories from the audio podcast, but with video. This week, continued fallout from last week in the US Capitol, more SolarWinds, a bunch of market data telling us where things are going, and more. Let's dive in. I feel obligated to cover the continuing fallout from last week. Most platforms have taken down Donald Trump's account or any accounts affiliated with pro-Trump violence. Reddit pulled r/Donald Trump, Twitch pulled his channel, Shopify his stores, Twitter his account, Facebook and Instagram too, plus Snapchat. Social app Parler says its vendors have abandoned it. Google on Friday, Apple on Saturday, Amazon, which is their hoster, moved on Sunday. Even its lawyers said goodbye. All cited violations of their terms of service. That new Alphabet workers union from last week, it asked YouTube to ban President Trump. I'm also tracking efforts to archive all that social media footage, pushed by historians and law enforcement alike. Finally, the EU Commissioner for the Internal Market has indicated this will bring a new era of tougher social media regulation. Why do we care? Look, tech is all wrapped up in this story. Regulation is coming, and social media is just code for data management. Remember that. Everything happening here is private companies making decisions about their services. Terms of service are about risk management. Companies are saying, we've had enough. They aren't governments. They aren't public spaces. And they are saying their own risk is too much. When we move into criminal activities, it's enough is enough. I care because of the lessons about risk management for smaller companies. How much risk are you or your customers willing to put up with for your own products and services? So how did HBO Max end up on Amazon devices after months of a standoff? The information is saying it's due to Warner Media signing an extension of their AWS deal. Why do we care? This is about power. Sure, two big companies duking it out, but one is in so many lines of businesses you can't ignore them. Then they use their position in one, cloud computing, to leverage the other, streaming services. That's the only reason we care. You might think that CEOs with experience are the best leaders for organizations. You would be wrong, according to the Harvard Business Review. Experience may not be an advantage. The article, based on 20 years of study, found that execs who ran two companies in a row performed 70% better the first time. That's measured by shareholder returns. Why? They, quote, fall back on the playbook from their last job. Why do we care? I look for leadership lessons all the time. Learning that experience may not be one for leadership is important. If leaders just fall back on their playbooks, companies aren't adapting. Good to know if you want somebody to run the same plays. Bad if you're looking for new leadership or new plans. This is human nature to some degree. You do what you think works. Important to know as you think about hiring people too. They do what they know. I also need to follow up on that Bluetooth-enabled chastity device. Remember that? The one that had a flaw where you could be locked in remotely by somebody else? Yeah, that one. The source code for the Chastity Lock ransomware is now publicly available for researchers. Meanwhile, a new trend in ransomware is emerging. It seems the gangs are focused on top-tier workstations, finding execs and managers to find juicy information. Why? Well, to force better ransom payments from the top brass. Why do we care? I can't resist that chastity lock story because of the absurdity of it. Not everything needs to be online. Open sourcing software isn't a panacea, but researchers are able to provide insights, and that's a good thing. Now, learning that attackers are getting more focused, that's news. It's more evidence of the transitions to extortion ware. Now, criminals are attacking targets selectively to find the best use of their time. It's smart. It's also intensely dangerous and harder to protect against. As it becomes systemized too, you're fighting against better and better adversaries, bringing a water gun to a tank battle. Bit more fallout from last week in tech. Parler, taken offline after losing its vendors, is now being mined for data. How? A lone hacker scraped all the data. Millions of posts pulled and then shared on the Internet Archive. Lots of it is metadata too, and includes deleted and private posts. Facebook is telling its employees not to wear company-branded swag. Leaders fear for the safety of their teams. AWS is telling its data center teams to be vigilant, and European leaders are calling for the removals of individuals to be done by legal means, not corporate ones. Why do we care? Parler's leaks tell me so much about data management. One individual is pulling so much personal data. Anytime I think about the value of data management, I'm going to think of this incident now as an example. Something is really broken when companies have to warn their teams about violence. It's clear we don't have a good regulation framework for any of this. It shouldn't be done by private companies, and government isn't effectively regulating the outcomes in a way society is comfortable with. Section 230 reform, not repeal, will be one of the ways this is addressed. How about a tax on algorithmically delivered content, or treating that as a publisher? Something to ponder, and why we care. Market data. It's my personal catnip. Let's play. IDC says used smartphones, both officially refurbished and used, will increase by 9.2% this year. A lot of that will be mature markets, where it's like a subsidy to push upgrades. This compares against the new market, which will decline 6.4% this year. Gartner has PC shipments up 4.8% in 2020 over 2019, and that's the highest growth in 10 years. Canalys says it's up 11% from 2019, and IDC has it at 13.1%. Each company has a slightly different methodology, but the story, all up. And how about Chromebooks? Intel says they had 122% growth year over year. Why do we care? I said in 2020 that I thought the equipment boost we saw is a sugar high, and I stand by that statement. That data is a look back, not a look forward, so don't plan for more. I'm super intrigued by the used equipment market. Is that because of the recession, or because of the maturation of the market, or because of the high price points? Or is the answer simply yes? Regardless, how much that will stay over time, and what does it mean? Longer life for these devices, for sure. Finally, I still believe Chromebooks is a bigger market than we give it credit for. Enterprising providers are going to prove me right over time. Obligatory Tuesday SolarWinds update. I will be batching these up until a threshold of size hits. This hit that mark for me. The company has revealed more and calls it, quote, a highly sophisticated and complex malware designed to circumvent threat detection. The company has determined that the threat actor accessed SolarWinds on September 4th, 2019. The test code was injected on September 12th, and their testing ended November 4th. Sunburst was compiled and deployed on February 20th, 2020, and the DLL available to customers on March 26th. The threat actor themselves removed the malware from build VMs on June 4th. Kaspersky has said that the backdoor is tied to Turla, a hacking group that operates on behalf of Russia's FSB security service. Why do we care? I'm so far impressed by the openness of SolarWinds. It has to stay that way to be sure. They have to overcorrect a lot to stay viable. The openness lets them position to embrace security best practices going forward. That's what we're watching for. The Russians are behind this, so says the US government, and so says the Russian-based cybersecurity company. Nation state is the key takeaway. That's an adversary on a whole other level. Just having the answers to customer questions is the reason we care right now. Be informed. Work from home. Are people more productive or less? According to Blind, about half of the respondents to their survey say less productive. But if you ask Bloomberg employees, 2/3 say they are more productive. But 2/3 at Adobe say they are less productive. Ask Twitter respondents, 70% say more productive. Netscope says there's a 148% rise in remote workers since the pandemic, and a 161% increase in visits to those high-risk apps and websites. The number of personal devices used nearly doubled, and 65% of IT execs say a quarter of their companies will work remotely permanently. Why do we care? My colleague Carl Palachuk, in his State of the Market address today, predicted we're going back to offices nearly like before. I disagree. I learned two things from this data. It matters a lot about your company specifically, and that's a big influx of remote work. I don't see it going back to the old ways because it's just too big a swing. That difference in company data tells me that different companies are building culture about how to work from home. When I think digital parity, it's clearly those companies that did a good job here. And so, be that company and teach others to be that company. That's the big value we're looking to sell, way more than just selling the technology. I'm going to highlight a piece in protocol. I might normally ignore this one because it's a bit of a light piece about RingCentral. But one thing did jump out at me. Here's the two quotes. Quote, part of that optimism is due to RingCentral's early execution on its long-term vision. The company struck lucrative partnerships with on-prem communications providers. And, quote, on the partnership side, no one else is at their level. Why do we care? I'm not one for fluff pieces like this, mostly because that's not my focus in terms of interest. You can get this kind of news anywhere. I care, and I hope you do too, because of that partnership focus. I'd say it's a more ecosystem one. They've placed themselves into a central spot by connecting and enhancing their own product and the others around it. It's an ecosystem built on partnerships. I've talked a lot about platform plays lately. Here's another. RingCentral is trying to position that way. And the reason I care about this news article is because the market has noticed. That's why we care. I talked about Parler being scraped for data yesterday. Today, here's the details of how. Per Wired, there were rumors on Reddit about how it happened. Turns out, it was not a misuse of two-factor authentication. Instead, the company just lacked the basic security measures needed. The technical details. An insecure direct object reference. A hacker can just guess the pattern the application uses to access data. Posts on Parler were in simple chronological order. Add one to the URL, you get the next post. No authentication and no rate limiting to stop people getting too much. So write a simple script and you can get everything. The company also didn't scrub metadata from images and videos. So, the archived content includes users' detailed locations, like GPS coordinates for their homes. Here's the best quote. It's gross incompetence. They marketed themselves as a private, secure, unmoderated platform, and instead it's comedy hour. Why do we care? I should scream. This is why there's money to be made in data management. They desperately needed someone to advise them on how to manage customers' data securely. Build that in from the beginning, you win. Ignore it, you can fail spectacularly. Like this. Sell services to do this, not just a bunch of products, but the advice to make sure this doesn't happen to your clients. It's my lead today because for so many in the SMB market, this is considered the number one rule. Vendors should not go after an MSP's customers directly. Two resellers, including one Microsoft MVP, have come forward with specific emails from Microsoft that do just that. In two different emails, Microsoft sales reps are offering support, training, and assessments. That public blog post shares one CSP. Quote, we almost lost a $50K per month Azure WVD client as Microsoft offered their implementation for free. We kept the client on board thankfully, thanks to value-added services. Or how about this conversation posted on CRN between an MSP and a Microsoft rep? Quote, someone wants to buy some Microsoft service, Power BI, so you're telling me that you're going to approach that customer and say, yeah, I'd love to help you with Power BI integration, and I can get you that licensing. Is that how that conversation would go? Quote, "I mean, in a nutshell, it could go that way," the sales manager said. CRN reached out to Microsoft for comment, and as of this recording, they had not heard back. Why do we care? It's the third rail for a reason. Nothing makes providers more angry than finding out about a vendor breaking trust. You can be shocked and not surprised at the same time. I'm actually shocked to find Microsoft doing this. My impression on them was that they were really investing in their partner relationships. I'm also not surprised, because of course they're going to go direct sometimes. They go direct even now. Walk and chew gum at the same time. Push back on them as a bad partner and call this stuff out. Also, prepare your moat by delivering those value-added services just like the CSP did. You can do more than they can, and you have to continue to do so. ISG says that in the last quarter of 2020, managed services demand began to recover. The report is up 6% year over year. This is the first time the segment exceeded $7 billion since the fourth quarter of 2019. Within that segment, IT outsourcing grew 14% and business process outsourcing dropped 27%. Managed services was down 4% for the entire year, and IT outsourcing was up 2%. ISG's data skews to larger companies, of course. Cloud increased 24% in the fourth quarter, mostly out of the infrastructure as a service section. IDC's data for IT infrastructure in general is similar, saying 9.4% increase year over year in Q3, but non-cloud IT infrastructure was down 8.3% for the same quarter, and spending on public cloud increased at a greater rate, 13.1%. So why do we care? Well, the headline writes itself. There's money in cloud and managed services, right? The money's moving out, too, out of on-prem infrastructure and into cloud service. This isn't earth-shattering, just more the trend. Tracking what we expect and have been tracking isn't bad. Uganda has ordered ISPs to block all social media apps as of Tuesday this week. This comes from the Uganda Communication Commission. Poland plans to make censoring social media accounts illegal. And Google is blocking all political ads until at least the day after the inauguration. The reason? Preventing misinformation. Why do we care? Civics lesson. The first is government censorship. The second is regulation. The third is a company deciding who they do business with. In the US, the first is illegal, the second inadvisable, and the third is a private company doing what it believes minimizes its risk. And it's legal. The new Alphabet Workers Union already has growth. It's past 700 members as of Monday. That's workers from 35 US and Canadian offices. They just went public last week. Why do we care? I'm going to continue tracking this union because in tech, this is a big deal. There's that one note. It's getting bigger. Quickly. CES was this week. With all the other things going on, one could think we missed it. Nope. Instead, the trends of note were more of the same. TVs, new computers, more devices, but notably, not a lot surprising. However, I did want to highlight something from Protocol. Emily Birnbaum writes, "As the world has changed, so has CES. While big tech faces a dizzying number of antitrust investigations, and small to medium-sized tech faces the prospects of imminent regulation on everything from privacy to AI, participants have to talk about the elephant in the room, the government. Why do we care? I've gone to CES a number of times. It's my experience that you have alternating years. 1 year on, 1 year less so. Last year I covered a lot of interesting trends. This year it's more of the same, just faster. I did care about that observation from Protocol. Small and mid-sized tech faces regulation. Longtime listeners are nodding. If you're new, this is not new. It's just getting louder. And louder that hits perception of a show often linked just to consumers. This is an odd collection of stories, but go with me. You'll catch up on a lot of stories, and I'm going somewhere with it. BMW has ended their subscription service for cars. Access by BMW started 2 years ago, and for $2,000 a month, you could get any BMW you wanted from a fleet. Apple has removed the feature that lets its own apps bypass the Mac OS firewall and VPNs in the new Beta 2 version of Big Sur. Microsoft, Salesforce, and Oracle are working with healthcare providers on digital vaccine credentials. The idea is a digital record to prove you've been vaccinated. The work is being done in the Vaccination Credential Initiative. Microsoft is also apparently nearly done getting its own native services, Office 365, Xbox Live, and Bing, into Azure. They focused on that, and now, per ZDNet, are almost done. The NSA is recommending not to use third-party DNS resolvers. Instead, use your own in enterprises or external ones with built-in support for encrypted DNS. So why do we care? Besides making sure we know this stuff, basic blocking and tackling, trends. Everything here is an expression of a trend. Subscriptions, security, migration to the cloud, most of these are just points on the journey. I do want to linger on the BMW story. Digging into it, some car makers and rental companies have had success with their programs and some haven't. They're still experimenting. Remember, the programs can be an and, not have to be an or. It's not subscription or nothing. It's letting customers buy the way they want. And we've hit the minimum required number of SolarWinds stories. CrowdStrike identified this week a third malware used in the recent attack. Called Sunspot, it was used first. It had one job, watching the build server. When it spotted the build, it would replace source code inside Orion with its own, inserting Sunburst. Also of note, Sunspot was designed with safeguards to prevent detection. One method, a hashtag verification check to make sure the hash is matched. Kaspersky researchers also have linked code similarities between Sunburst and the Kazuar backdoors. That's remote access malware. It suggests a connection between the two. Hackers operating under the moniker SolarLeaks are claiming to sell stolen data from the breaches. Victims supposedly for sale include Microsoft, Cisco, FireEye, and SolarWinds. Microsoft's code is being offered for $600,000, SolarWinds for $250,000, and FireEye for $50,000. The claims are dubious. Cisco has said there's no evidence their intellectual property was stolen. Microsoft President Brad Smith called on governments to be held to a higher standard. He also called it a violation of norms and rules, both during a keynote address at CES. The CISA has stated in new guidance that government systems are being breached using methods besides SolarWinds Orion. This time, they're focusing on SAML tokens being abused. And finally, JP Morgan has issued stock advice on the company. They're optimistic. Why? They believe the majority of customers will stay with Orion. This could have happened anywhere, and Orion costs less than the competition. Why do we care? I've shared my thinking with investors too that I agree with the JP Morgan analyst, and I said so before. SolarWinds can recover. The more we learn, the more this is an incredibly sophisticated attack. We care to study it. Vendors to learn how to prevent it, and providers to learn about how it happens and what questions to ask. Thanks for watching the video edition of the Business of Tech podcast. If you like the show, go ahead and hit like and subscribe. You'll get new episodes every week, as well as our editorial and interview content. If you want to support directly, you can also subscribe on Patreon at patreon.com/MSP Radio. You get early access to content and able to give me feedback and interact with questions. Additionally, you can catch all these stories every day on the Business of Tech podcast, available on all the podcatchers or online in written form at businessof.tech. Thanks for listening.